Information about Gordon. He was born in Toronto, Canada. Taking up the trombone at age 11, he quickly progressed and performed with the National Youth Orchestra from Canada, 1964 to 1967. Good times. Graduated from the Eastman School of Music with a Bachelor of Music degree in trombone performance and has had some really amazing teachers. After performing with the National Arts Center Orchestra for 4 seasons, he won the position of principal trombone in the Vancouver Symphony, a position he held for 35 seasons till 2009. Yes. Gordon also taught for 33 seasons at UBC, the Vancouver Academy of Music, and performed with the CBC Radio Orchestra for 34 seasons. Taught at festivals in the summer, including Powell River. That's cool. And now, Gordon runs Cherry Classics Music, a brass music publisher and distributor. He also enjoys performing solo recitals with Joyce, of course, traveling, cooking, gardening, and being a grandfather. So please welcome Gordon Cherry.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much, Cantor Cohen and Rabbi Feinstein, for having me here today. This is a topic that's really dear to me, and I'm really so glad to see such a nice full group today. And it was a delicious lunch, wasn't it? And you'll have to excuse my raspy voice. I don't know what it is, but I'm not sick. Okay, let's get on with it. We're going to have time at the end for questions, and I'll do my very best to answer as many questions as possible. The miracle of the Israel Philharmonic. And the man behind its creation, Bronislaw Huberman. Let's start in the present with a rousing performance by the Israel Philharmonic and their present music director, Lahav Sheni, in the finale from Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 4. It's loud. Okay, gives you an idea of how they play. They're one of the greatest orchestras in the world. And now on to our adventure, the miracle of the Israel Philharmonic. The creation of the Palestine Symphony, which then became the Israel Philharmonic upon the creation of the State of Israel, was born out of the passion and struggle of one man, Polish violin virtuoso Bronislaw Huberman. We will now learn more about him, his early years and his years of fame. Huberman used his talent, his fame, his determination, and his political savvy to fight for the musicians and their families to escape hate-ridden Europe of the mid-1930s and bring them to Palestine to begin their new lives in the new life of the Palestine Symphony. Bronislaw Huberman was born in Częstochowa, Poland in 1882. That's where my great-grandparents came from, to a poor Jewish family. He studied locally and then at the Warsaw Conservatory, eventually at the age of 10, studying under the famous Joseph Joachim in Berlin. Unfortunately, their relationship was strained, and 4 years later, Huberman ended his formal studies on the violin. Now here's a picture. He began to concertize at age 11, pushed mercilessly by his hot-tempered father, who had lost his teaching job and had decided that Bronislaw was the sole key to the financial success of the family. Check out the faux beach scene with the sand below. In 1896, at age 13, Huberman performed the Violin Concerto of Johannes Brahms in Vienna. By the way, side note, this weekend coming up, VSO, Gil Shaham, Israeli violinist, is performing the Brahms Violin Concerto with the VSO and Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 5. Okay, so Huberman performed this at age 13 when Brahms was himself in the audience. Brahms was stunned by the quality of his playing at such a young age. He wrote a congratulatory note which became the keepsake of Huberman. It was passed down through the family and was recently auctioned. Here it is. And if you can read the music at the top, that's the theme from the second movement of the Brahms Symphony played on the oboe. Huberman toured Europe and North America in the 20s and 30s, and he became recognized as one of the world's greatest violinists. However, his fame was always overshadowed by Heifetz and Fritz Kreisler for a number of reasons. But here's a sample of his playing, and you'll get an idea. It's the Carmen Fantasy by Sarasate, and I'm going to play just, a little bit of it. There we go. So, a failed marriage to German actress Elsa Galafres bore a son, Johannes. Johannes married Barbara Pentland. Pentland is a well-known Canadian composer who lived in Vancouver, and he was married to Barbara, and he died in 1996, so there's a little bit of a connection between the Huberman family and Vancouver. The horrors of World War I shocked Huberman to his core and forced him to see the darker side of humanity. The trauma of it humanized him. After a lifetime of shelter, touring with his father, living the life of an artist, only concerned with his career and concertizing, he was aroused with a searing political consciousness that would be the major focus for the rest of his life. Huberman, who was tormented by the loss of life, experienced an epiphany that the hidden link between his artistic side and his political side was the following philosophy. The true artist does not create art as an end in itself. He creates art for human beings. Humanity is the goal. Quite a thought. Huberman, being kindled by his new passion, abruptly canceled all concerts for 2 years, and in 1922 began studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, embracing the pan-European movement, which called for the political and economic union of the European states in the hope of preventing another war. He and other intellectuals such as Einstein and Freud also promoted this idea. But just 15 years later, the Nazis would shatter this dream when they began hostilities towards their neighbors. In 1929, Huberman first visited Palestine on tour as an artist and became passionate about the vision of establishing a base for classical music in the Holy Land. He was touched by the exuberance of the audiences who had music running in their blood and were spiritually starved for music and culture. It was during this 1929 visit to Palestine that Huberman became enthralled with Zionism. Maybe it was here he found the family he didn't have. After a quick rise in popularity beginning in the 1920s, Adolf Hitler was appointed by President Hindenburg as Chancellor of Germany in 1933, and soon, with his Nazi party and the support of millions of citizens, began the stranglehold of Germany's Jewish citizens that took away their freedoms, their spirits, their families, their jobs, and eventually their lives. Hundreds of German Jewish musicians found themselves out of work. They had been members of the greatest orchestras in the world, including the Berlin Philharmonic, under the direction of Maestro Wilhelm Furtwängler. Furtwängler claimed to be an advocate of his Jewish colleagues, but he remained in Germany through to the end of the war. He would struggle with his decision for the rest of his life. William Furtwängler made a deal with the devil. By the way, and so did Herbert von Karajan. Same thing. Von Karajan, however, was a member of the Nazi Party. Furtwängler never joined the Nazi Party. Joseph Goebbels, Reich minister, promised Furtwängler funding for his Berlin Philharmonic and an agreement to go easy on the Jewish members if Furtwängler decided to stay and conduct in Germany. By 1935, the Berlin Philharmonic was Judenfrei, without any Jews. And that was also the same in Vienna and a lot of other orchestras in Germany and Austria. Huberman was one of the first to recognize the extreme danger to Jews remaining in Germany. He had an intuition of the horrors that were to unfold in the future, and unfortunately, he was right. He wrote a letter to his colleague Furtwängler, head of the Berlin Philharmonic, promptly canceling all of his concerts in Germany until conditions for Jews were normalized. Huberman went public through newspapers by declaring he was an enemy of Nazism. Huberman met Ida Ebbeken, a nurse at the treatment center he went to for stress. They eventually formed a very close bond and remained together until his death. She was his nurse, secretary, housekeeper, and love of his life, a true partner in every sense. In 1934, Huberman returned to Palestine to present a recital tour to the culture-starved audiences who promptly bought up every ticket for all 12 concerts. When discovering that many could not afford the prices, he offered to perform reduced-rate workers' concerts as well. During his tour, he fell in love with Palestine and dreamt of the extraordinary opportunity to enhance the local arts culture by creating a first-class orchestra in Palestine and saving Jews from the coming tragedy in Europe, which he foresaw. This dream became the passion of his life for the next 2 years. The creation of an orchestra in Palestine would be like a fist against Nazism and would build prestige around the world for Jews and their nascent nation. That was a quote from him, by the way. Arturo Toscanini, that's one of his great iconic photos. He was the most renowned conductor in the world, and he was also distraught and furious with Hitler's Nazi philosophy and was also an ardent anti-fascist. After refusing an invitation to conduct at the world-famous Bayreuth Festival, Hitler himself wrote a letter asking the maestro to reconsider, but Toscanini held fast to his beliefs and refused to conduct, composing a letter of his thoughts that he made public to the world. Huberman read Toscanini's letter and quickly wrote to him with his dream of forming a world-class symphony orchestra in Palestine made up of exiled Jewish musicians from Europe. Toscanini replied to the affirmative, and Huberman, who was ecstatic, traveled to Italy to meet with the maestro. Toscanini agreed to conduct the opening concerts of the new Palestine Orchestra, a huge coup. And Huberman was, like I said, ecstatic and immediately began making plans. Little did he know that his struggle was just beginning. Huberman spent the next 2 years of his life auditioning hundreds of musicians from all over Europe, not just Germany. At first, there wasn't much interest in moving to the desert, but as Hitler's vice closed in, Huberman became deluged with requests. Realistically, he knew there would be physical, political, and financial limits to the numbers he could accept. But 80 to 85 was his working number, plus families. He could only accept the best musicians. He knew well what lay ahead for those who didn't make it into the orchestra. Now here's a picture of the French horn section. Huberman knew many of the musicians from Poland, his birthplace. So in fairness, he held blind auditions, so that means behind the screen. He was way ahead of his time. Selection to the new orchestra would be based solely on the quality of their musicianship. The Ginsberg family had 4 members who made the grade, and Horst Solomon, he was principal horn of the Berlin Philharmonic, who had been fired, was also a world-class weightlifter who wasn't allowed to compete in the Berlin Olympics. Loren Fenivesh, a young Hungarian violinist, auditioned in Budapest. His career eventually took him to Palestine, Israel, Switzerland, where he was the concertmaster of the Swiss Romande Orchestra, and then to Toronto, where he was professor of violin for a long time and settled in with his family there, and he taught at the Faculty of Music. There's a great story I have about him, but that'll be another time. In early 1936, Huberman worked with increasing fervor, knowing that the deadline for the orchestra's first concert in October was approaching and that conditions for European Jews were rapidly deteriorating. Just when Huberman was stepping into high gear, several things occurred that added stumbling blocks in front of his dream of creating a new orchestra in Palestine. Kurt Singer, a charismatic Berlin physician, choral conductor and cultural icon, ramped up the Jüdischer Kulturbund, a cultural federation of over 1,300 Jewish artists who were fired from German cultural institutions and were desperate for work. Singer made a deal with the Nazis to allow Jewish artists to produce Jewish-only productions, secretly hoping to outlive the Nazi regime. Now, just a little side note. At the beginning, Jews were only allowed to produce music for Jews. Then they put the squeeze on them more, and Jews could only produce music composed by Jews, for Jews. So Mendelssohn was put in that group, Offenbach, Meyerbeer, and others. And so the squeeze even happened in the niche part of orchestral music. You would think, would they think of everything? They thought of everything. Tragically, most of those artists were eventually sent to their deaths, including Singer. The next problem was money. Huberman needed a lot of it, and the world was still suffering from the effects of the Depression. Against all odds, he put his solo career on hold and launched a Palestine Symphony fundraising tour throughout North America. Now look at this, 42 concerts in 60 days. I mean, that's insane. Because let me tell you, I'm sure he didn't take jets everywhere. He twisted arms, gave speeches, wrote articles, gave dinners, and talked to everyone he could think of, calling in all of his connections he'd made in his distinguished solo career. He enlisted heavy hitters like Einstein, the world's most famous Jew. Huberman became a statesman. His partner, Ida, was very worried about what the stress would do to his health. He gave a Carnegie Hall solo recital. At that very concert, this is another lecture, his prized Stradivarius was tragically stolen from his dressing room while he was on stage performing with his brand new to him, Guarneri. He never saw that violin again, but miraculously, it appeared over 60 years later when the thief's wife discovered on her husband's deathbed that he had stolen this famous violin from the dressing room. And that instrument, known as the Gibson Huberman Strad, is now owned by Joshua Bell. And Joshua Bell did some great recordings, of course, and one very famous performance that he gave, and I was talking just earlier to Narit about this, Bell gave a concert in Częstochowa, where Huberman was born, on that Stradivarius violin with the Częstochowa Symphony. Yeah. Here's the award, $2,500 for the stolen violin, made in 1713. Now, a gala Einstein dinner raised the balance of the money needed to fund the orchestra for its first season. Great! No. Unexpected Arab violence from within Palestine caused by Jewish immigration threatened the whole project. Huberman was urged to postpone or even cancel his plans. He was close to a nervous breakdown. But Toscanini graciously agreed to a 2-month postponement of the concerts until December. Phew. The postponement was a two-edged sword. The extra time was putting pressure on the musicians, many of whom had no income, in some cases no roof over their heads. They knew that they were coming to Palestine in October, so a lot of them sold their homes when they could. They did the best they could. Now they were homeless, but now they had to wait an extra 2 months. And plus their families. Plus there was the added danger of the musicians staying any longer in Europe with that vice closing in on them. But the added 2 months gave Huberman more time to audition the final musicians and get the visas from the British authorities, who were the masters of immigration into Palestine. And of course, the British were in charge of Palestine after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. So due to many pressures, there were strict quotas that the British put on the number of Jews entering Palestine. And if you remember the story about the ship Exodus, okay, Jews were clamoring to get into Palestine, and yet the British wouldn't let them in. Huberman's plans then run into an immigration snag with the Jewish agency headed up by David Ben-Gurion. The needed visas had to be approved by Ben-Gurion and the Jewish agency, and they wanted workers and fighters for the future state of Israel, not Huberman's fancy musicians who they thought would return to Europe after the tensions were over, wasting precious visas guardedly held by the British. They would only agree to temporary visas for the musicians. But Huberman, not one to quit, went to a higher authority than Ben-Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, president of the World Zionist Conference, a man who had helped the British win the First World War. He invented the chemical needed to make TNT. Weizmann went to everyone he could think of in the British Home Office to have them issue permanent visas to the musicians to enter Palestine. After months of silence, October 11, 1936, the visas finally arrived, and the musicians could now travel to Palestine with their families. In late October, the musicians arrived by steamer in Haifa. Huberman contacted William Steinberg, the out-of-work conductor of the Frankfurt Symphony. Now, Steinberg went on to conduct the Pittsburgh Orchestra and, for a brief time, the New York Philharmonic. And Steinberg was asked to prepare the orchestra for 2 months in advance of the arrival of Toscanini. The musicians were bused to Tel Aviv, where they moved into their new lodgings with their families, plus they had to learn a new language. Testing, 1, 2, 3. In early November, 2 months of daily rehearsals led by Steinberg began in preparation for the inaugural concert on December 26, 1936. Now look at this picture. That's the timpanist. And those aren't plastic heads, those are calfskin heads, so you can imagine what damage the rain did. Well, the 2-month delay meant the weather was cooler and a lot wetter, because remember, we pray for rain in the wintertime. The concert hall was actually the Levant Pavilion, a dilapidated exhibition hall that leaked like a sieve onto the musicians and their instruments. The leaks were plugged, but it was unpleasant because of the incessant noise of the rain and banging from the renovations needed on the building. Renovations took place after hours in order to keep the rehearsals noise-free after an outburst from Steinberg. He stormed off the stage one rehearsal and started screaming, and that was the end of it. Well, they were amongst the finest musicians in Europe. The third of them were first-chair players, so that whole first violin section were pretty much all concert masters. You can imagine the egos involved and the talent. And when Toscanini's orchestra was put together, the NBC orchestra, that was called the Orchestra of Concertmasters also. And it was half Jews and half Italians that made up that first violin section for Toscanini. But here are some of them. Huberman insisted on the creation of a school of music along with the orchestra, so the talent of the musicians with their teaching could plant seeds amongst the Palestinian youth for the future. That idea to this day has contributed greatly to the culture of the country. Toscanini's arrival on December 20th was like the coming of the Messiah. The anticipation of the first concert with the maestro conducting had been building for months. Tens of thousands of music-starved residents were clamoring to get their hands on any of the 3,000 tickets for the opening concert. After 60 rehearsals with the new orchestra, Steinberg handed over his baton to Maestro Toscanini, who stepped onto the podium and, uttering just 2 words, Il Brahms, led the orchestra without stopping through the entire first movement of Brahms' Second Symphony. And you wonder, why would a conductor who's never conducted an orchestra go through the entire first movement without stopping and saying something? Because he was checking. He wanted to hear everybody in the orchestra to hear what the quality was like, so he would get an idea of what he had to deal with. Then you go back. So a lot of times when the VSO would have guest conductors, they would do the same thing. Take us through the whole movement and then go back and start, rather than start nitpicking right from the beginning. So just sort of a technique. Here's a poster of the concert on December 26, 1936, which included the Rossini Overture La Scala di Seta, Brahms Symphony No. 2, the Schubert Unfinished Symphony, Mendelssohn's Scherzo and Nocturne from A Midsummer's Night Dream, and the Weber Overture to Oberon. Huberman refused to perform a concerto as both he and Toscanini wished for the orchestra and not he to be the star of the show. Here's another program in English. I dug that up the other day. Keep finding more and more stuff. Now, there's a picture of the orchestra. After years of planning, frustration, auditions, politics, wrangling, stress, fundraising, and more endured by Huberman, the orchestra was finally prepared and ready to perform its first concert with Maestro Toscanini. The concert was a smashing success. The orchestra played at a level unheard of in most orchestras of the world at that time. The audience went wild with enthusiasm. It was a cultural earthquake. Now, here's a very rare but poor quality clip from an excerpt from the Schubert Unfinished Symphony. And you can see below from this photo, there's a Huberman's signature, Toscanini, Tel Aviv, 26 of the 12th month, 1936. And I'm excusing this. This is all we have. So yeah, I'm sorry for the quality of that. That was actually recorded from, not the concert, but from a radio broadcast. And there's a 2-minute clip, and that's all that's left of the concert. Maybe one day something will surface, you never know. The success of the initial concert was a dream come true, and the ecstatic mood could not be described in words. The concert was the talk of the town for many days. People will recall their feelings about it years later as one of the great joys of their lives. It was a triumph for all. An orchestra of exiled Jews performing at a very high level would send a clarion call to the world to raise a fist against anti-Semitism, fighting Nazism with the only weapon they had, their music. The concert was broadcast and heard by millions around the world. The orchestra continued to perform their series of formal concerts in Palestine until January 5th. Now, here are the concerts presented in Jerusalem and Haifa and around the country that Huberman was really excited about, the ones for the workers and soldiers that he had promised. Within 8 days of concerts, more than 15,000 people heard the orchestra. Toscanini returned once again in 1939 for a repeat set of performances, this time with Huberman as soloist. Now look carefully, and can you make out the person speaking to the audience? Golda. Took me a little while to figure that out, but she was everywhere. Upon the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, the orchestra changed its name to the Israel Philharmonic, and one of its first conductors was the young Leonard Bernstein. He returned dozens of times to conduct the orchestra in future years. By the way, I was on their website this morning, and I hadn't realized that the Israel Philharmonic had no music director from their founding in 1948 until 1977. They only had guest conductors and music advisors. So Bernstein was one advisor, and we'll talk about the other ones later. But the very first music director, who remained for a long time, was Zubin Mehta. Now, here's a story about Leonard Bernstein conducting the Israel Philharmonic and possibly saving the newly formed nation from a serious military defeat. Thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, wherever you are, for telling me the story. November 20th, 1948, in Beersheba, the orchestra played a concert for thousands. Egyptian spy planes were overhead. Remember, there were no satellites back then. These planes mistook the movement of the audience, which is a collection of soldiers and citizens, for an imminent attack, leading their army into retreat. So the event was described as Mozart in the desert by Time magazine. It was a period when concerts were often held amidst nearby artillery fire, and Bernstein once famously continued playing a concerto despite being warned of a potential air raid. And years later, during the Iraq War, if you remember, Isaac Stern continued performing for the audience even though a gas attack warning was issued. Bernstein concert was remembered as a symbolic moment of cultural resistance, with many noting his dedication to bringing great music to the new state of Israel despite the danger. And he was there in this picture playing piano and conducting at the same time. So that's why they called it Mozart, because he was playing a Mozart piano concerto. And you can see the musicians are standing, so maybe it was probably for Hatikva. Yeah, okay. Now here are the maestros who were major conductors of the orchestra since 1936. William Steinberg, Paul Perret, Bernardino Molinari, Jean Martinon, who eventually conducted Chicago Symphony, Leonard Bernstein, of course, Zubin Mehta, who conducted Montreal Symphony, and then the New York Philharmonic, and then LA Philharmonic. He was appointed the first music director in 1977 and director for life in 1981, and the present music director emeritus after he stepped down in 2019. And the present music director is Lahav Shani, who you saw conducting the finale from the Tchaikovsky Fourth Symphony. And Shani is a young man, as you can see. He's a pianist, conductor, and composer. The IPO records, tours internationally, and is recognized as one of the leading orchestras in the world. To conclude, here's a video of the Israel Philharmonic performing Hatikva, conducted by their music director, Lahav Shani. Let's stand together and sing Hatikva. Thank you. I'd like to refer you to the well-known documentary about this story, Orchestra of Exiles. It was produced in 2012 by Josh Aronson and Denise George. It was the inspiration for my presentation, and I recommend it highly. So now, do we have time for questions? Okay. Is there an extra microphone around? There we go.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you. Another round of applause. That was amazing. Okay. Is this on? I think it's on. Yes, it's on. Marielle says it's on.
And it doesn't have to be just a question if you have a story to relate, if it isn't too long.
Bill, any stories to relate?
Who composed Hatikva? Do you know? And I can also tell you
I
that
think his name is Cohen.
I attended the Palestine Philharmonic at one time, but don't remember who the conductor was, and I cannot tell you the date.
So there is a story. You see that there's the words, and it didn't become, Hatikva didn't become the anthem, official anthem of Israel until quite recent, relatively recent, like the 1990s, something. Shani?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I believe the melody, maybe someone else can jump in, was pre-existing.
There's also the melody from
Okay.
Smetana's De Moldo. Da, 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 dee, dee, da,
So the melody was around before they added the words.
dee, dee, da, da, dee, dee. So that's the Moldau, and the Mav Lost from his tone poem Mav Lost. Yeah. So it's got a
different parts.
hodgepodge of composers, and the text was changed. The text has been changed a few times over the years. Yes, good question.
Question? Okay, here it comes.
It's not a question, it's a comment. First of all, from what I understood is that Huberman saved more people than just the orchestra members, and I think it was about 1,000 families that he brought to Israel just to save them.
Yes.
And,
Yes,
yeah,
you're right. I should have put that in. It was about 1,000 with the musicians and their families,
yeah.
and it was very strict. It was about 1,000 people's lives who were
The life
saved.
saved by him. The other thing I wanted to mention is the concert hall was named after him in Tel Aviv. The concert hall is called the Huberman Concert Hall. It's in Tel Aviv.
And maybe I should mention why he didn't make such a big splash like Heifetz and the other violinist, Chrysler. His recordings, a lot of his recordings were damaged and lost from fires and floods and everything from Europe. He did a lot of recordings over in Europe. And it wasn't until he came over that those two artists really took advantage of recording technique and whatever. And Huberman, if you remember from the talk, he interrupted his concert career to take on this project. And so when in the music business, it's a nasty business. When you're out of touch for even a year or two, they forget about you. And so all the people involved with concert, the concert people that stage concerts, they're not interested in you anymore. Now, Hatikva, Shmuel Cohen, he was an early Zionist. He is credited with composing the melody for Hatikva. He took it from a Romanian folk song known as the ox-driven cart. So there you go. Thank you.
Cool.
This is AI, by the way.
That's great.
But I did. The thing with AI I'm finding is if you know some of the answer, then you can sort of guess if it's wrong or not. But I knew it was a Cohen name.
So I wanted to ask you personally, when you first played the bit from Tchaikovsky, and it starts off with a big thing for the trombones, and that made me think you've played so much music, but always from the trombone standpoint. And I do know that when the trombones play, everything, stands to attention. It's really like you don't play like as much as the violins, but when you play, boy, do you play. So I was wondering, in your head, when you think, what is the sound of this piece? Do you hear predominantly trombone part, or do you hear the whole thing?
Oh, that's a good question. So while I'm sitting, one of the great things about playing in an orchestra, especially in the trombone section, is you're sitting at the back and you're getting to hear the most intense rendition of this music that you love. And it's something that never leaves you. So I'm getting to hear all my colleagues play, and it's inspiring all the time. And then when I pick up the instrument and I'm playing, I'm like part of this, and now it's time for me to put the pedal down and literally drag the orchestra. We literally lead the whole orchestra from the back because they can't help but hear us. So we're literally, so in that piece, that's an explosive piece for brass and percussion. You saw the Hasidic man.
Yeah.
only in Israel. Yeah. So it's very exhilarating to be sitting and playing. Thanks, Wendy. Yeah.
But now you sit in the audience. Sitting next to him in the audience, you can always tell when the trombones are going to play. Because he sits up.
my friend Frank Harmanis, who played in the Toronto Symphony for about 35 years, passed away a few years ago of multiple sclerosis. And he says he still, even though he was paralyzed, he still would go over exercises and he could still, do the positions in his head and everything. And that's the way life is when you're on an instrument, whether you're a pianist, you're fingering things, you're vocalizing things, your brain is just set for your music. And it's our life and it's our passion. Yeah. David.
In the script that was up there, it had anti-Semitism hyphenated with a capital S. And the current vote started by Deborah Lipstadt, who was the representative for the Biden administration in fighting anti-Semitism, suggests you not hyphenate it, you don't have a capital S, because the Arabs say we are Semites, we can't be anti-Semitic, and nobody knows what a Semite is, and therefore it shouldn't be hyphenated or capitalized.
Thank you. And you know what? From now, not from in the last several months, I've started using the word Jew hatred instead of anti-Semitism. I just use the words Jew hatred.
Doesn't matter who is saying it, we know what it is.
We know what it means. Correct.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Violetta?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a personal experience. When I was living in Israel, I went to the Philharmonic Orchestra several times, and I was lucky to have Zubin Mehta as a conductor, as well as, well, he was not exactly a conductor, but he was the guest, Perlman. I forget his first name.
It's
Isaac Perlman, and then and the latest, Mr. Lehav. And the highlights of me being there at the Habima Theater around Jewish people, and then the rendition of Hatikva, there's nothing that can be more uplifting ever for me.
yes.
Thank you.
It's a lot of emotions.
Okay, one more.
Just a Hatikva fact is that it was the de facto anthem since 1948, and it did not become official, you'll never guess, November 2004.
There you go. Thank you for that. I knew it
So
was
recent.
relatively recently.
Okay, last question. Last question.
It's not really a question, but a comment about Zubin Mehta, who's been mentioned a number of times. So my sister, who lives in Jerusalem, mentioned that he is now boycotting the Philharmonic and says he will no longer play or appear with them because of what happened in 2023. Any comment on that? It seems that the Philharmonic evolved out of politics, and politics is still impacting the symphony.
While I was doing my touching up, I've given this lecture a few times over the past 10 years. While I was brushing it up the other day, I came across on Wikipedia that Zubin Mehta swears he will never again give a concert in Israel because of the treatment of the Palestinians. So, what can I say?
Well, it just indicates that music even sometimes can't supersede
The politics, yes. And of course, somebody mentioned earlier that Wagner is almost never performed in Israel. A few music directors or musicians like Daniel Barenboim have tried to get Wagner performed. Wagner gave an essay in the 1830s as a pseudonym. He hid it's called The Jew in Music. It's about a 40-page essay where he talks about how Jews cannot properly compose proper German music because just like they speak with an accent, their composition has this Jewish accent, and it's the music of the gutter. So, but also Wagner was a great impetus to Hitler. And so because of that connection, the Jewish state and Israel Philharmonic decided from very early time on they were never going to perform any music by Wagner. I think it's agreed that Wagner was a genius. However, he was a flawed genius. Just like many human beings in the world, we can think of many of them, whether they're business leaders or politicians, might be genius at a certain focused thing that they do, but they might be terrible human beings. So Wagner's music has been only performed once or twice with the Israel Philharmonic. They did one small piece of his on tour as an encore, and the musicians were allowed to walk off stage if they didn't want to play it, or at least not play. So politics enters the musical world even.
For sure.
Yes, they were allowed to leave the stage. Yes. Oh, yes. It's happened, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen times in the Israel Philharmonic's history and other orchestras in Israel. Yeah. I know it's a difficult thing as a Jewish artist. By the way, Wagner's great-grandson is an ardent anti-fascist, anti-Nazi. He's very pro-Israel. Friedrich Wagner, he came here about 40 years ago. I went to his lecture out at UBC, and he signed his grandfather's or great-grandfather's score for me of Der Meistersinger. And it was a great lecture, and you can look him up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to conclude, but Gordon's here if you have more questions one-on-one. And just to say thank you so much for sharing this amazing story and history with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. As we leave, Rabbi Feinstein. We can talk about it afterwards.
Yes, there are a few people who wanted to see it.
I already had several requests, both from people here and from people who were not well enough to come. And if we could have a link to this presentation
Yes.
available, that would be wonderful.
Marielle's
That's
going to do.
very kind. Thank you. Thank you, Gordon.
Great idea.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day.